Good morning to everyone. I should start by saying that 12 years ago, an unprecedented public debate began in Guatemala, and the seriousness of the problem of violence against women was put on the public agenda. Women's organizations launched a campaign called for women's lives, no more deaths. And these crimes that had been silenced for so long began to be reported. It was a movement that was around all Latin America, and in Guatemala it was launched by the Non-Violence Against Women Network. This campaign has two results. First, people began to reject the previous long-held notion that it was normal for women to suffer violence in the hands of their partners, fathers, brothers, or anyone who felt it the right to discipline women. And second, the magnitude of the problem of violence against women, which had been invisible up until then, began to become visible. When we examine the numbers of violent deaths of women in the country, more than, you have seen the numbers now, we have more than 700 deaths each year. I think that in Ireland are less than 10 murders. We have 700. We start asking us, why is one of the highest rates in the world? Why so many? Why is this viciousness? Why these deaths? And we understood, as the United Nations has affirmed, that violence against women is a continuum, because we experience violence at various stages of our lives in both the public and the private space, and because violence is present since our nations were founded. And in Guatemala, violence grew during the war. As you may know, in Guatemala we have a war that lasts more than 3 decades. And during that time, gender-based violence intensified. In 1996, the armed conflict came to an end with the signing of the peace agreements. And according to the Truth Commission, more than 200,000 people were either killed or disappeared. The Commission also documented torture, sexual violence, and the Commission also concluded that in 1981 and 1983, there were acts of genocide committed in the country. In the report of the Truth Commission, there were 1,400 cases of sexual violence documented, but we think that there were many cases that were not reported, because if we compare the cases of sexual violence with the cases, for example, of torture, there were 14,000 cases of torture, and we could imagine that in a situation where torture is happening, it may be come with also with sexual violence. One of the reasons that these cases are unreported is the silence that comes with sexual violence. As one of the survivors mentioned, never before had I told anyone that the soldiers raped the woman, much less than they also abused me. I am going to take this to my grave. Nobody could know. My children don't know, my husband doesn't know, nobody knows. Few women share their pain, which contributes to the rise in isolation and feelings of guilty. In the cases where it was known that sexual violence had been carried out, it was silenced or denied due to the extreme shame felt by survivors, their families, and their communities. These acts of sexual violence committed during the war had enjoyed complete impunity. In that time, in none of these cases had the perpetrator been penalized. And the state response to the violence that women suffer in daily basis was similar. As you see, 90% of the cases were unpunished. Only very few cases were investigated, and even less cases were the perpetrators penalized. There were several reasons for this. I think I will explain them. Although Guatemala had ratified the Belém do Pará Convention in 1995, which clearly sets out the commitment of all states to guarantee women's rights to a life free of violence, in Guatemala, the only normative consequence was the pass of the law of violence against women. It was a step forward because now women could get protection measures, but it has two limitations. One, that it was defined, violence against women was defined according to the place it took place, the family. So the victim could be either a man or a woman, and sometimes when women come to ask for protection orders, the men will also file a claim. So you have two victims and two perpetrators inside the family. And on the other hand, they didn't realize or make visible that it was the gender discrimination, the one that was generating violence. And two, in this law that was approved in 1994, violence against women was not a crime. So if a woman suffered violence from her partner, it has to be like more than 10 days in the hospital before the police could intervene. On the other hand, there were also normative obstacles in the regulation of sexual violence, of rape. For example, the criminal code established that if the aggressor marries the woman, the victim, he could be pardoned. And the law was, the crime was defined as protecting the honor of the victim, not her integrity or freedom. This was the reason why marriage could repair the rape. And another obstacle that was that criminal law regulate that these crimes were by the motion of the party. In other words, the investigation depends on the victim reporting the crime, and if she was intimidated and she says that she doesn't want to continue with the report or with the criminal investigations, they will go unpunished. Besides these normative shortcomings, there were other limitations that prevent women's victims of violence access to justice. Their testimonies were doubted. People working in the legal system did not believe women's stories. and they doubted whether they were telling the truth. They think that in the line of their prejudices, they believe that victims report the case in order to obtain some kind of advantage. And also, when the victims came, they made them feel guilty for being the victims of the crime. They interrogate them regarding the ways they dress, their previous behavior, the places they visit, implying that the aggression could have been their fault because they don't behave as expected of a woman. And in addition, public officers often didn't listen to the woman. As I said, it is difficult for women to tell or to say that they have been victims of rape, but even when they tell it, they wouldn't hear or they wouldn't see it. For example, if a woman has been murdered, they will not order to get the evidence, so to see if before the killing she suffered a sexual assault. And often the victim has to choose between getting access to justice or medical assistance. Health professionals would repeatedly refuse to safeguard the evidence because they don't want to testify at court. And on the other hand, if the victim went to the police or to the prosecutor's office, there will be no doctors to help them or protect them. And as a result of complaints made by women and women's organizations, 3 important changes in domestic law were made. In 2005, the Constitutional Court ruled that the article of the Criminal Code that pardoned the aggressor if he marries the victim was unconstitutional. So this is no more part of our law. In 2008, a law against femicide and other forms of violence against women was passed. And for the first time in the country, it declared that violence against women is a crime. Psychological, physical, sexual, and economic violence now have criminal consequences. In 2009, sexual violence crimes were redefined, focusing in protecting women's integrity and security and freedom. And now it's a public crime, public action crime, so it doesn't depend on the will of the woman to continue presenting charges against the perpetrator. And together with these changes in the law, we put in place a comprehensive response model. Before, if a woman brings charges because she has been victim of rape or domestic violence, she has to go by an office, another office, another office, one day, another day, another day, and she never gets the response of the system. And now in this comprehensive response model, they work all together. Psychologists, social workers, prosecutors, police, forensics. So it is the systems that goes around the woman and not the woman that need to go office by office by office. And also, this model works by 24 hours. Violence against women doesn't happen between 8 and 4 in the afternoon. So now it works 24 hours every day and every day of the year. When the law against femicide was approved, there was a debate around whether if we need or we don't need a specialized criminal courts. They say that, well, there are ordinary criminal courts, why do you need specialized ones? But when I asked the prosecutors why the cases of violence against women or cases of rape did not move forward, they told me because we were the last ones in the row. The judges believed that these were not important cases, so if we ask for an audience to get an arrest warrant or present preliminary evidence, they were not scheduled. And after we start having these 24 specialized courts, it was a great change. This has enabled cases to be dealt with faster, obtaining protection orders and arrest warrants faster, so that it is the aggressors who has to leave the house, not the woman and their children and her children. As well as these achievements, the cases of sexual violence that occurred during the war were brought before the domestic courts. In the genocide case that was ruled in 2013, the crime of sexual violence was included as a form of genocide. 10 women survivors gave their testimony of the acts of sexual violence they have been subjected to. In the case of genocide, there were more than 100 testimonies, and this was a very important moment. We didn't knew how to manage it. It was the first time that this was going to happen, so we asked the court if we could do it behind a closed door, but the tribunal rejected, and we have to do it in an open audience. So we start thinking what would we do? Do we continue? We ask maybe they will be re-victimized because their families didn't knew that what happened today, or their communities. So when we were discussing this issue, one of our colleagues said, well, let's ask them. They are a strong woman. Let's see what they want to do. And as he said, they said, we will testify. What we will do is that we will cover our face so that we will not be recognized. And we also arrange that the first files of the court will be filled by women, so they will not feel alone. And they went and they gave their testimony, and they said in the front of the perpetrator, Efraín Ríos Montt, who has been the head of state of Guatemala, who has ordered all these gross human rights violations, they told him, you ordered these crimes against us. We are people, we are not animals, you are guilty, it is not our guilty. And I believe that these testimonies were very important in our country. We have another case now that is in front of the courts, a case of sexual slavery that happened in Sepulsarco, and I really believe that even though there was a conviction in the case against Ríos Montt, he was convicted in the charges of crimes against humanity and genocide. Even that this sentence was annulled, the trial in itself, it was important for the victims to have the opportunity to be in an equal position with the perpetrator and take out the guilty of their bodies and put it where it should be, in the body and of the perpetrator. Finally, I will say that in my country there have been a lot of advance. I think that the making violence against women a crime is a big step forward. I think that having the specialized courts has been a step forward also. But I think that access to justice should be all around the country. And to conclude, I would like to leave you with this thought. Criminal law alone cannot deal with violence against women. As you hear, we have more than 50,000 cases each year. So it is necessary that these efforts are complemented with preventive measures, and the best prevention of violence are policies that promote equality between men and women. Thank you.